Welcome to another deep dive. Ready to get into something we all do constantly but rarely really think about:
Let me guess.
communication.
You got it.
So we've got a bunch of sources for this one. A YouTube lecture that gets pretty deep into the weeds. Then there's a business site with some tips and tricks. And this one is interesting, a magazine article from the Chartered Institute of Payroll Professionals, the CIPP.
The CIPP. That's kind of a curveball. What do payroll pros have to say about communication?
Well, that's what we're going to find out. But overall, I think the mission here is to give everyone listening a solid understanding of communication, how important it is, how it's changing, and most importantly, how we can all get better at it.
Sounds like a plan. It's definitely more than just, making small talk, right?
Exactly. And, I think most of us just assume that we're pretty good at communicating. But I was going through one of the sources, the importance of communication in everyday life. And slide 2 just stopped me in my tracks.
What was on slide 2?
It said that two people can get the exact same message, but come away with totally different interpretations.
Oh, yeah. That happens all the time. We've all got our own experiences and baggage and ways of seeing the world.
That's what it was saying. It was talking about emotions and cultural backgrounds and all the different stuff that gets in the way.
It's like we're all looking through different colored glasses.
Exactly. So how do we get past that? How do we make sure that we're actually on the same page when we're talking to someone?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? But recognizing that this potential for misinterpretation exists is the first step. It underscores the importance of certain things, like clarity and active listening, even empathy.
So you're saying knowing that we can misinterpret each other can help us be better communicators.
Exactly. It all comes down to creating a shared understanding, not just transmitting information.
That's a really good way to put it. So, okay, shared understanding. Why does it matter so much?
Well, one of the sources, The Importance of Communication Skills in Everyday Life, said that 85% of success is linked to how well you can communicate.
85%? Wow.
Yeah, it's a lot. It basically means that being a good communicator is mission critical, no matter what you do in life. It's not just some soft skill you can pick up along the way. And that other presentation, Importance of Communication, slides 3 and 4 go even deeper. They say good communication can help resolve conflicts, build those strong relationships we all want, and even help us make better choices in life.
I can see that. Like, it's not just about crushing it in your career, it's about navigating your personal life, right?
Exactly. Everything from how you interact with your family to how you handle tough conversations with friends.
Oh, and the Faster Capital source, they said something similar. They emphasized how good communication builds trust and rapport at work, with friends, even in romantic relationships. Okay,
Ah.
so good communication equals good relationships.
Yeah.
Got it. But hasn't the whole communication game changed in the last few years?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, think about everything that's happened since, the pandemic.
Totally. It's a whole different world out there.
That CIPP article, The Importance of Communication and How to Do It, talks about this. They really hit the nail on the head with the whole shift to virtual meetings. And of course, the masks.
Oh my gosh, those early Zoom calls, it was a disaster.
I hear you. Everyone talking over each other,
Awkward.
silences, and trying to read people's faces through a tiny screen.
Yeah, and don't forget about masks. That article points out that, even though masks were necessary, they made it really tough to pick up on those subtle cues we normally rely on in face-to-face conversations. It's like losing
Yeah.
a sense, like we had to relearn how to talk to each other all over again. It makes you wonder if the way we communicate has, fundamentally changed.
Yeah, for sure. There are all these new challenges to navigate now. It's definitely made us all more aware of how many different ways there are to communicate and how easy it is to get things mixed up.
Totally. But with all that said, are there any, timeless communication strategies we can rely on? Like, no matter what, these things will always be important.
I think so. And all the sources we looked at, they all kind of point to the same set of core principles. I was thinking we could call them the 7 keys to effective communication.
Ooh, I like that. The 7 T's. Okay, let's hear them. What's key number 1?
I think the first one, the most fundamental one, has got to be active listening. Both Faster Capital and a lot of the other sources talk about this a lot. They emphasize really hearing what the other person is saying, not just waiting for your turn to jump in.
It's about being present in the moment, right?
Exactly. And it goes back to what we were saying before about how people can interpret the same message in totally different ways. Active listening helps bridge that gap by, making sure we're all on the same page.
It's like, okay, I'm not just listening to respond, I'm listening to understand.
Right. You're going beyond your own assumptions and biases and really trying to connect with the other person.
I like that. Okay, so Active listening is key number 1. What's next?
Key number 2 is clarity and conciseness. Faster Capital was really big on this one. They were saying we should use straightforward language, avoid all that jargon, especially when we're trying to communicate complex ideas.
It's like, just get to the point.
Yeah, no one wants to listen to someone ramble on and on.
Especially not when they're trying to explain something complicated.
Right. Clear and concise communication means everyone understands what's going on.
It's about respecting the other person's time. Okay, key number 3. What do we got?
This one's kind of related to clarity. It's nonverbal awareness.
So we're talking about body language now.
Yeah.
Tone of voice. All those subtle things that can tell you so much about what someone is really thinking or feeling.
Yeah, that's it. The importance of communication, presentation, and a few other sources mention this. They said those nonverbal cues can make or break your message.
It's almost as a secret language, right? Like sometimes you can tell more from someone's body language than from what they're actually saying.
Oh, for sure. It's funny because have you ever noticed how sometimes someone will say one thing, but their body language is telling you something completely different?
All the time. Like when someone's like, I'm fine, but you can totally tell that they're not fine at all.
Exactly. That's why this whole nonverbal awareness thing is so important. It's like learning to read between the lines.
So give us the rundown. What are some of the nonverbal cues we should be paying attention to?
Well, eye contact is a big one. It usually means that someone's engaged and listening to you. But sometimes, like if someone stares at you for too long, it can make you feel uncomfortable.
I see what you mean.
Oh, and it's different in different cultures, too.
Oh, right. Like in some cultures, making direct eye contact is considered rude.
Exactly. So you always have to be mindful of who you're talking to and what the situation is.
Good point. What else?
Posture. The way someone sits or stands tells you a lot about how they're feeling. Like if someone's slouching, they might be feeling insecure or disinterested. But if they're standing up straight, that usually means they're feeling confident. And then you've got facial expressions, of course, but I think most people are pretty good at reading those, at least the basic ones.
Yeah, a smile usually means happy. A frown usually means sad, and so on.
Right, but sometimes it's the really subtle changes in expression that tell you the most, like a slight tightening of the jaw or a flicker of annoyance in someone's eyes.
Wow. I never really thought about it like that before.
It's a skill, for sure. The more you pay attention to those little cues, the better you'll get at reading them.
Okay, I'm going to start paying attention. Key number 4, bring it on.
Key number 4 is empathy. It goes hand in hand with nonverbal awareness.
Empathy. So like putting yourself in someone else's shoes, trying to see things from their perspective.
Exactly. A lot of the sources talked about this, but Faster Capital was especially big on it. They said it's all about understanding how the other person is feeling, what they're going through, even if you don't agree with them.
So it's not about being right or wrong. It's about understanding where the other person is coming from.
Right. Everyone's got their own unique story, right? Their own struggles and successes that shape how they see the world.
Makes sense. So how do we actually practice empathy, especially when we're talking to someone who's got a totally different viewpoint?
Well, it starts with listening, like really listening without interrupting or trying to force your own opinions on them, and then asking questions, not to challenge their ideas, but to try to understand their thinking.
So it's about being curious, not confrontational.
Exactly. You don't have to agree with them, but you have to respect that they have their own thoughts and feelings.
It's about creating a space for honest, open communication. Okay, that was number 4, empathy. What's key number 5?
This one builds on what we were just talking about. It's called adaptability. Adaptability. So like being flexible in how you communicate.
Yeah. Like Esther Capital was saying, there's no one-size-fits-all approach to communication. You have to adjust depending on who you're talking to and what the situation is.
So it's like you need to have different communication styles for different people. It's like a toolbox. You wouldn't use a hammer to tighten a screw, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So how do we know which tool to use when?
It all depends on who your audience is and what the context is. Are you talking to a friend, a coworker, your boss, or someone you just met? Is it a formal presentation, a casual chat, or a heated debate?
I get it. You got to read the room, right? Know when to be serious, when to be relaxed, all that.
Exactly. And it's not always easy, but the best communicators can sense those subtle cues and switch up their style as needed.
So it's about being flexible, adapting to whoever you're talking to.
Exactly. Okay, moving on to key number 6, feedback.
Ah, feedback. That's a big one. Both giving it and receiving it. Right. This was something that a lot of the sources talked about. They all said that feedback is essential if you want to get better at anything. and it's a two-way street.
So you have to be open to hearing feedback, but you also have to be able to give feedback that's helpful, not just critical.
Exactly. It's a balancing act. You have to be honest, but you also have to be kind.
So any tips on how to do that? How to give and receive feedback in a way that actually works?
When you're giving feedback, be specific. Focus on actual things the person did, not just your overall impression of them.
So instead of saying, "You're always late," you'd say something like, "I noticed you were 15 minutes late for our last 3 meetings."
Exactly. And explain how their actions impact other people. Like, when you're late, it disrupts the meeting and makes it harder for us to stay on schedule.
That way, you're not just being critical, you're explaining the consequences of their actions.
Right. And when you're on the receiving end of feedback, listen. Ask questions to make sure you understand. And try not to get defensive.
It's tough, but I guess it's about seeing feedback as a chance to grow.
Exactly. And remember, not all feedback is good feedback.
Oh, that's a good point. How do we tell the difference between good feedback and bad feedback?
Think about who's giving you the feedback. Is it someone who knows you well? Do they have your best interests at heart? Does their feedback align with your goals?
So it's about being selective. Okay, on to the final key, key number 7. What is it?
This one brings everything together. Conflict resolution.
Ooh, conflict. Everyone's favorite topic.
I know, right? But it's a fact of life. It's going to happen. And when it does, it's important to handle it constructively.
So we're not talking about avoiding conflict or pretending it doesn't exist. We're talking about facing it head on.
Exactly. The Faster Capital folks and a few of the other sources made this point really clearly. They said the goal isn't to win. It's to find a solution that works for everyone.
So it's about collaboration, not competition.
Exactly. It requires active listening, empathy, clear communication, and a willingness to compromise.
So basically, all those other keys we just talked about.
Yeah. Right. Conflict resolution is like the final boss of communication.
I like that analogy. Okay, so we've covered the 7 keys to effective communication. But how does all of this actually play out in the real world?
That's a good question. It definitely helps to see these ideas in action. And luckily, some of the sources gave us a few examples, like that CIPP article. They talked about Rose Ayling-Ellis.
Oh yeah, from Strictly Come Dancing.
Yep. The first deaf winner of the show. I think her whole story is such a powerful example of how nonverbal communication can, like, break down barriers.
Absolutely. The way she used sign language and facial expressions and body language, it was amazing to watch.
It really challenges the idea that spoken language is, like, the only way to communicate, right? Or even the most important way.
Totally. She was expressing herself authentically, and it resonated with everyone.
Exactly. And, her story is also a great example of adaptability, right? She had to adapt to a whole new way of communicating on that show, working with a dance partner who didn't know sign language.
And think about the judges in the audience. They had to adapt too.
Right. It just shows how powerful it can be when we're open to different ways of communicating.
Yeah, it can really open up a whole new world of understanding. Okay, so Rose Ayling-Ellis. What other examples did you find?
Oh, the Faster Capital article had a really good one. It was about a customer service rep at a call center.
Oh, call centers.
Yeah,
Not exactly known for their stellar communication skills.
I know, right? But this rep was different. The article said they were able to turn a really angry customer into a happy one
How'd they do that?
by using those key principles we were talking about. Active listening and empathy. Instead of just reading from a script, they actually took the time to understand the customer's problem.
They actually listened.
Yeah, they validated the customer's feelings and then worked with them to find a solution.
It's proof that even in a high-pressure situation like that, good communication can make a huge difference.
Totally. Every interaction is a chance to put these skills into practice. Okay, so we've talked about why communication is important, how it's changing, and some key strategies for success. What do you think? What's the main takeaway for our listeners today?
Good question. I think for me, the biggest takeaway is that communication is like a process. It's something you work on your whole life.
Yeah, I like that. It's a journey, not a destination. There's always room for improvement. So if I could add one more thing for our listeners to think about, I'd say pick one area of communication you want to work on.
Like one of the 7 keys.
Yeah, exactly. Maybe you want to get better at active listening, or maybe you want to be more aware of your body language. Whatever it is, focus on that one thing and really practice it.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. Like pick one thing and make it your mission to get better at it.
Exactly. Use every interaction as a chance to practice. Trust me, it'll make a difference over time.
I love it. Okay, so that's communication. We covered a lot of ground today. And, as we've been talking about all these different ways to communicate, talking, nonverbal cues, writing, it's made me think about something we haven't really touched on.
What's that?
Silence. Like those pauses in a conversation, those moments when you choose not to say anything at all.
Interesting. I see where you're going with this.
I'm wondering if those silences are a form of communication too.
Hmm. That's a really good question, and I think you might be right. Sometimes saying nothing can be just as powerful as saying something.
Exactly. Like a pause can add emphasis to a point,
Mm-hmm.
or a moment of quiet can show that you're really thinking about what the other person is saying.
And sometimes just being there quietly with someone is the most empathetic thing you can do.
Yeah. Like sometimes offering advice or trying to fill the silence can actually make things worse. Sometimes it's best to just give the other person space to process their feelings.
It's about respecting their silence.
Exactly. It's a reminder that communication isn't always about filling the space with words. Sometimes it's about those quiet moments in between.
Well said. So on that note, we'll leave everyone with that thought, the power of silence.
Thanks for joining us for another deep dive. Keep exploring, keep learning, and keep those communication channels open even when there are no words being spoken.